So we're gonna walk up from the front porch here. This was added later. And I was disappointed that we didn't go to the basement because the last time I went, we went to the basement. So now we'll enter and hello, this is Simply Exploring and Adventuring with Lewis. Today we're coming to you from the Zimmerman Center here at the Susquehanna Heritage Center on the York County side down by Wrightsville. Not too far from Shanksmere. We're just up the road from Shanksmere here in the Wrightsville area. So I'm waiting for a house tour here of the center. But in the meantime, I'm just going to do a quick look around before the actual tour, house tour begins. You know what to do. Let's go create our own adventure. Well, like I said, I'm not sure if this is the back of the house or the front of the house. I would assume that that over there is the front of the house because that's the river side of it. And then this would have been the back, probably the back yard area, whatever. Wow, that's cool. Look at that. The bridge. Musky. They're showing a video, a 15-minute video, an introductory video of the Susquehanna area and the river and both sides of the Lancaster County and the York County where we're at. There's Deer Creek. And they have a lot of different paintings. Oh, neat. I didn't notice that right there. They have that part on the other side, you'll see. And then there's a restroom there. And then there's more paintings here. Five-plate stove or German stove right there. And then there's that little pass-through, I guess, it would be used to heat the home while they were using that side to cook, I believe. And then they're showing the restoration of this place before, because it had fallen into disrepair. But we'll get more information on the tour. Like I said, right now I can't, until official tour guide starts showing us the place, we won't know more. But this is the other important thing that they have here. They have pieces, as you can see, of, I guess, pieces of slate with some of the Native American art. So these are the Walnut Island petroglyphs. A picture of the Little Indian Rock down at Safe Harbor. And then this is the Bald Friar petroglyph, now removed or submerged. So outside of the actual the Little Indian and Big Indian rocks, this is one of the few places here, and in the State Museum up in Harrisburg, they have also artifacts from both here on the Susquehannock, what is it? I know what it was called. They named it a Heritage Park area. Just up behind here, if you look over there, those steps go up. That's Heritage, Native Lands. That's what it's called, the Native Lands, where there was a village there that held up to like 900 people at one time. But then there was also like, I think it was like 90 people over on the what is now Conestoga, Pennsylvania, over on the Lancaster County side, because they had moved down to the Maryland area, but then a group of them moved back up, and then they started calling themselves the Conestoga, with the Susquehannock, which were part of the, what did they say? They mentioned it up in the one other room. I'll take you again, sorry. They're also playing the video, so they have the Captain John Smith Chesapeake National Historic Trail. We're on that actual trail. But if you didn't know, also the Susquehanna River starts up near Cooperstown on I'm trying to remember the name of the lake where it begins. So I know sometimes they also put on period gear, and then down there is the actual vaulted cellar. Oh, wait a moment, I forgot to show you something here. I don't remember if that was here the last time. So this is the actual house from the riverside view. So the very front of the house. And then right here is the attic, called the Lingenderstuhl. That's the type of truss system they used for the roof here, or lying chair means, it's German for lying chair. And again, we just saw that same vaulted cellar that has the remnants of Thomas Cressup, and they'll get into that later.
Would you like to join a tour at all?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so let's see here. So you said you were more interested in the colonial history? Do you have a time limit at all?
Out in Nosani, or what part of the Iroquois. That's who the Susquehanna originally came.
And fully completed, being built in 1750. And I love this old photo of this house that was taken in 1840. So the house is already 100 years old when this photograph is taken. And I think it gives us a good idea of what this landscape used to look like and the house itself. So you may notice that there's a few features that are already different than our house, what it looks like today. So the overhanging eaves are no longer there of the roof, as well as the windows are actually lower than our windows today. So the second family that lived here in the 1850s did some remodeling to the house, and that included taking off the overhang edge of the roof, as well as lowering the windows. So our house today is restored back to how it originally left when it was first built in 1750. You can see there is another structure in this photograph, this wooden building to the left that's now where the parking lot is today. So this house was one of the first stone homes built on this section of river. And it was a welcoming sight for people crossing the river on the ferry boats for a new life in the Conestoga wagons heading out west that were crossing right here at this part of the river. As this was a number of years until the house could be fully built, the family that first purchases this property to build a house and that operates the ferry boat service is the Meyer family, and they build first this wooden building on the property, and they live there until this house, Grand English style mansion, is fully built.
Any idea how long it took to build the house?
We think, so the family purchased the property in 1748. 1750 is what this house has been dated as fully being built at, so 2 years is what's been estimated.
Not bad.
Yeah. The room that we're standing in is actually replicated and was a part of the original house. So the room that we're standing in actually by the 1990s no longer existed. So it appears also as part of the remodeling that the second family did was that they removed the bake oven and this open hearth fireplace and this entire room. So by the 1850s, a lot of families were moving away from this style of cooking and had wood stoves, which were recorded in the estate inventories of the families. So as this is going out of fashion as a form of cooking and baking, it appears that may have been the reasoning why they removed this room from the house. But in the 1990s, the husband and wife of the Zimmermans that restored this house were doing work on this property to restore it and uncover here the original hearth.
I was going to ask if this was original because it looks really cool.
Yeah, so you can see where this original hearth floor was worn away by the women over the years doing the cooking and the baking for their families. The one family that lived here had 11 children, most of which lived to adulthood, which meant that there was a lot of cooking and baking happening here. Baking day was 1 day a week. So this room that we're now standing in was replicated in the 1990s. The state and Kinsley came and did archaeology and found the original outline of this room and then rebuilt from the floor up what they believe it would have looked like on the house originally. So we do have a workable squirrel tail bake oven here. We can look inside. So this is what the oven looks like on the outside. It's this large stone circle and has this extra stone extension on the top called the squirrel tail. You see there. So these ovens were used 1 day a week on baking day, which in Pennsylvania was a Friday right before the Sabbath. So the women are doing the baking for the full week. So many different types of baked goods were made there. So we fire up our bake oven here about once or twice a year. And to do so, we have to do it just like they did. Set a fire here that's going to start the residual heat going towards the stone of the oven. Then we set a fire way back in there. This oven works similar to pizza ovens on people's back patios today. So we have a long paddle, just like the women did back then. Once it's hot enough, we're able to set the food right on the stone in there, and the hot air circulating really works like a convection oven. And so we can see the channel in the very back there where the smoke from the fire goes through right over top of the extra stonework of the squirrel tail and then out through the chimney through the upper hole there. So a really great feat of engineering. We were surprised when we put in cookies and tested the temperature in our modern way. And we looked at the package of cookies and said, okay, it should go in for this many minutes in our oven. We set it in there, and take them out, and they come out burnt charred to the pan. So actually, these ovens were very efficient and actually baked 2 times faster, we found, than our traditional ovens today. So really surprising to us, but every oven was a little different, even though if they were made in the same shape, just the way that they were heated. So bread, pies, and cookies, and then food like baked beans could be heated up in ovens like this. So it's definitely a part of the history here. It's a little unique that this summer kitchen and baked oven here is connected to the house.
Right.
Normally there's a separate outbuilding, but they found that this was connected, and there's a few homes like this in Pennsylvania as well, with it connected, such as the Susquehanna River House. But yeah, this is definitely where women stood over 200 years ago and did the cooking and baking for the families. So if we would like, we can go into our other rooms here.
Yeah. She entertained Ben Franklin a lot.
She did. Susanna Wright, one of the her family founded Wrightsville here, has a very interesting history in this area as well. So we can keep on going through and talk about the colonial history, and then I can come back and give you the Native American if that works. So if we come here, we can see a photo. Actually, let me grab my images in here. So come in here. We can see what the vaulted cellar looks like there that is holding up this house. This semicircular stonework. So this is the cellar that the families use to store their goods, to preserve them for the winter. You can see there's the windows for ventilation, as well as there's a set of stairs that goes outside, which would have been very useful to the families here. So the first family that decides to have this house built here is German, and the father is a merchant and had lived most of his life at sea. Makes sense. He wants to be along the Susquehanna River, be getting shipments in and out and selling and trading goods with the people that are just coming into this area. So as a result, that is where they would have kept them. The second family that lived here, of the Dritt family, they operated, at one point the son operated a grocery store in the basement, the cellar of this house. So we know that many people came here and got supplies as they headed on their journey out west. As well, so to create this vault, it was a little unique venture on behalf of the builders here. So to create this, they actually created a mound of dirt in this shape of this large this large hill of dirt, essentially. Then they laid the stonework on top of the dirt. Then they dug out all the dirt and placed the dirt actually on top of the stonework and the cellar itself, and then that is what the house rests on today, is that dirt that was dug out of the cellar when they created that shape. So a little unique part of our building structure here. This room, as well as the Susquehannock room across from here, it appears were originally one of the private rooms of the house. We can see in the hallway how the house would essentially be separated into two sections here.
Oh, okay.
Right? So these are the more private rooms back where we are for the family. And the two front rooms here facing the river are the more public rooms for people coming and visiting and getting supplies as they stop along their way. This that we see here, this lovely staircase, is original, as many of the rooms here are original to the house and have not changed too much from its original structure, but the floorboards on this floor are reproduction, as this floor was almost entirely in disrepair. However, these are the original floorboards, and our second floor and our attic also have many of the original floorboards that the families walked on when they lived here. One unique feature of the staircase here is that we see the banister and the spindles here. Many are original, they're in the English style, which this house is a very English style house with its tall ceilings and its gabled roof. However, if we stand about right here and look up, you can see that the spindles on the top of the staircase are a little different looking. So if you see up there, the staircase changes into the German style. So if you stand like right here and look up, you can see that the staircase looks a little different there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's a unique feature of the house, and we find a lot of these architectural details blending the German and the English style. The family that first has this house built is very much in the German culture, and yet they build a very English style house. So it appears that they really blended both the German and the English throughout the house. And we know very little about that first family, but that doesn't surprise us either, because within German culture, it is more common to not leave behind as many records, other than birth certificates or death certificates or marriage licenses. So it doesn't entirely surprise us. So through that, a lot of what we learn about the first family comes from the architecture and the archaeology and what we find. If we come in here, we see another blend of the English and German style in the fireplace here. So this is very much like our fireplaces today in the English style. However, you may notice they look a little different. It's on a curve, not a corner, like many of our fireplaces today. And we may notice that there actually is a hole here on the other side of the fireplace. And when we come into the next room, we can see why that hole.
I didn't realize that went through it first.
There's the hole she was speaking of.
So here you can see the hole and back of the fireplace that we have here. So that hole and this section as well is where a 5-plate stove was connected, which was the German way of heating your house. Believe it or not, people of different cultures had different heating systems that they used. So some families that lived in German homes that traditionally had more of a lower ceiling would sometimes only have a 5-plate stove to heat their house. Whereas the families that lived here had 4 of these 5-plate stoves, 2 on the first floor, 2 on the second floor, connected to the back of the fireplaces here. You can essentially, it's heated by the fire in the other room, and you can also sometimes put hot coals in here. And it heats the house, it heats this room, and you may also notice that this room is on a curve to thoroughly heat as well. So this house would have been pretty warm in the winter. And you can see here how a 5-plate stove, very similar to this, would be right in front of right in the back of the fireplace here, and the section on top, you can see in this diagram here, it would be connected to the back of the fireplace. And then any smoke that's generated from the stove goes out through the chimney. So very inventive technology, and like I said, this house would have been pretty warm in the winter, and it took a lot to heat this house as well. And if we take a look today outside of the river, even though it's a little windy out there today, but lovely view here, just like the families that lived here had. So this house actually sits along the widest part of the entire Susquehanna River. So the river itself is 444 miles long, and it's often been called a mile wide and a foot deep because, you know, there are these shallow parts, and the river doesn't get too wide in a lot of places. There's a lot of these shallow inlets. However, when we look across the river here, we can see there's that, it's not too grassy today, that brownish hill there, and there's a little white house on top there. So that's the edge of the river, and what appears to us as the edge of the river of that tree line are islands in the middle of the river today. So the river extends past that to the hill where that white house is. And if you were to measure from this side of the river to the other side, it's about 1.65 miles across. So that makes it considered the widest point of the river. And as it was so particularly wide, even before the creation of the 4 hydroelectric dams on the river, it made it a great place of crossing, especially as the bridges connecting the 2 counties here don't appear until the first bridge in 1814. That's a large amount of time that people have had to cross the river without that. So that's why the ferry boat transportation was so important. Every family that lived here operated the ferry. Here there were a number of ferries along this section of river, such as Wright's Ferry upriver at the family that founded Wrightsville. Because this part of the river has always been particularly wide, parts of it have always been shallow as well. So when the Susquehannock people in the 15 through the 1600s lived across the river in Washington Borough and Lancaster County, when they would cross the river, this is where they would cross. It was only a few feet deep at that time, it appears, and even though it's wider, it makes it a better place to cross, as this river was known for its treacherous places, and especially as you headed downriver from here, it was considered dangerous and had wicked rapids, fast-moving water, very different than what we see today. Normally, but it's a little windy.
It's a little windy today, yeah.
So here we have in our artifact case some of the artifacts that were found on this property. They found over 20,000 just within this house itself. So this house archaeologically has really helped to tell the story and learn about the families that lived here. And it also brings up some questions for us that we don't yet have answers to, such as who was making shoes here? You know, shoemaking is an interesting trade that we've never seen referenced in any documentation, but it's obvious that children's shoes were being made here, adult shoes being made here. We find shoe molds. It makes sense that since the second family of the Dritt family had 11 children, we find children's toys here. It appears that the families that lived here knew that there used to be a Native American community on the hill behind here. At the time this house is built, that community is no longer a place where anyone is living. Actually, the Susquehannock people, by the time this house is built, have moved across the river and are living at a place called Conestoga Indian Town. However, that land that was once the Susquehannock homeland becomes the farmland for the families that live in this house. And as they're farming the land, they're coming up with all these artifacts that were left behind. And there might have even been remains of the town then still. So we do find Native American objects from that town that find their way into this house that are being collected by the families. So we have here a head of an axe and 2 arrowheads that appear to be from that town. So I talked a little bit about the first family that lived here. The second family that lived here we know a lot more about. So they were very well known in the community, and the father of the 11 children, this man right here, General Jacob Dritt, he was known for his military service in the Revolutionary War, and he was also known as the main supplier of alcohol to York County.
Okay.
He was a well-known man and shipped alcohol up and down the river here as part of his business. He gets this drawing done of him by Lewis Miller, who was a prominent artist in York County. You can see he's in his older age when he gets his portrait done, and yet he still wants to be shown in his military uniform that he had worn as a young man in the war. It's very evident to us that the war was very much a part of who he was and his identity. When I think of General Jacob Dritt and his story here, purchasing this house in the late 1700s, I think of his story as the American dream realized. This man was the first child in his family born here in the New World. His family immigrated from Switzerland and had a small farmstead towards where Lomont Farms is today, where he grew up. He and his siblings grow up in a one-room log cabin, and that is where he lives most of his life. Then he goes on and serves in the Revolutionary War and becomes known for that military service. He's captured in the failed defense of New York and is held as a prisoner of war for a number of years in the ships in New York Harbor. He's then released and marries his wife Elizabeth and is able to purchase this big grand mansion. Essentially, you know, it's the American dream realized in my mind. This man grows up in a one-room log cabin and then gets to one day own this big grand mansion and have a family. And so it really comes full circle for him. We can also see here, and there's pieces of plateware that it appears the Dritt family owns with the hand-painted colonial American flag on it. They were very, it appears, patriotic and proud of his military service. And they also were growing, as they're farming the land behind here, they're growing tobacco. And actually, this stalk of tobacco right here was found hanging to dry in the attic years later when they found it during archaeology.
Any idea how he made his money?
Yes.
He didn't get out of the service, he didn't get a whole lot of money.
Exactly.
He got land, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so it appears that as his father had died and he was the oldest son, he gets a substantial money from the will. And as he then takes over operation of the Blue Rock Ferry service here, when he purchases the house, that really allows him, it appears that that's where most of his income is coming from. And then in addition to the alcohol business as well. So it appears that he's mostly able to purchase this house from what we are able to understand from the will disbursement of his father. That's a great question.
I think Brendan used it wisely.
He did, it appears so, yes. There's another person that is not a family member who has a story here. In 1795, in March 5th, Jacob Dritt, who just saw the drawing of, purchases a enslaved 10-year-old boy by the name of Moses. And we have here a purchase document reproduced of Moses. So Pennsylvania is a little unique when it comes to slavery. Slavery was, Pennsylvania is the first state to pass a gradual abolition act against slavery in 1780. And that act is really revolutionary for enslaved people living, born after this act in Pennsylvania. So what this act does is it creates in the future a free people population that had not been there before, and Moses is one of these people. So Moses, as we see on the purchase document here, it says that he is to remain enslaved until the age of 28. And that was the law, that any child born to an enslaved mother in Pennsylvania after March of 1780 is to be free upon their 28th birthday. It also does something which creates that people have to have a legal record, that you have to record the enslaved people you own and you have to submit them to the state. There now has to be a legal record with the names of these people, and you have to have a record if you sell an enslaved person. So it creates a paper record for people that otherwise would not have left behind any. You can see here that so Moses is sold at the age of 10 years old, and he is to remain enslaved until 28. We know very little about Moses and his story here. As far as we know, Moses was the only enslaved person named here, other than one person before Moses, that was just listed in the first population inventory of the United States. So we have one other document that tells us a little bit about Moses. So it appears in the will of General Jacob Dritt. It has a line in his will that says, "To my late servant, Negro Moses, I give $20 for a new suit of clothes." There's a lot to unpack in that one sentence. One, he calls him a late servant. So late means he's no longer living here, and enslaved here, which fits with the timeline. By the time of Jacob Dritt's death in 1817, Moses, according to legally, should not have been enslaved here, and it appears he's not. Also, he calls him a servant, which brings into question, was he a servant, was he enslaved? Well, legally, they didn't have a term for these people. What do you call people that are enslaved but only for a period of time? They didn't really have a name for it. So essentially, legally, they begin to call these group of people that will one day be free enslaved indentures. And legally, they call these people servants, but then they make sure to put that they are Negro. They are African American, and it is based on race. So it's very much this complicated situation. So the will then says that Moses is to receive a new suit of clothes. However, as after the death of Jacob Dritt with these 11 children, many of which had lived to adulthood, there's a lot of debate over who's going to get what from the estate. So it takes a number of years for the estate to be fully paid out. But we do find that Moses, it says in the executor's report, that a tailor in York County here receives $10, half the money, to make Moses a new suit of clothes. So we know Moses receives his suit, and that is when we lose track of Moses. It's entirely possible that he moved to Columbia, which had a large group of free people very early on in our history here. Or he's living in the area in some way. So we have not been able to find a Moses with the last name of the Dritt family or a variation. Apparently Moses does not take the last name, so that makes it really hard to track someone when they don't have take the last name of their owner, essentially. So we've been looking into, Moses' story and his role here. You may see here in our display case, we have reproduced ad that was in the newspaper there that tells about the death of General Jacob Dritt. So Jacob did drown in the Susquehanna, and he was the second member of his family to do so. Just a few years prior, one of his sons unfortunately drowned in the river here. In 1817, that was a very harsh winter, and ice was throughout the river. And this account of his drowning was all throughout the newspapers when it occurred because he was so well known. So essentially the story is that it's a few days before Christmas and he sets out on the ferry boat and he goes to the other side of the river and meets with his oldest son, who's now living in Lancaster. And his oldest son begs him not to return to this part of the river and says that the water is far too icy and that he should stay with him for the night. General Jacob Dritt persists. He's known for being a little stubborn. So he reaches about halfway across the river where we are today and hits a chunk of ice, and the boat sails downriver about to where the wind turbines are at Turkey Hill and capsizes. As it does that, he drowns, and for months his body is missing, and his wife Elizabeth is grieving, and it's all throughout the newspapers into Maryland to be searching the river for him. They do find him, and his wife Elizabeth puts a reward of $300 up for the location of her husband's body. $300, it's a lot of money back then.
Yeah.
It's a lot of money, and it's interesting that when we look at the will of Jacob Dritt, $300 comes up, which was great for us to be able to find a relationship with that. So $300 in Jacob Dritt's will is the amount of money his wife Elizabeth is to receive as her yearly spending money after his death. That is essentially what she is putting up as a reward to find him. He is found by enslaved people on a plantation in Maryland, on the Maryland shore. They find him and they bury him where they find him in Maryland. And to identify him, they saved his boots. His boot straps and his boot buckles apparently were significant and unique in some way. And the family identifies them as being their fathers, their husbands of Jacob, and they decide to leave him there, and the rest of his family is buried in the family cemetery on the hill behind here that is still cared for by the Dritt family descendants today. So that's essentially the Dritt family story here as well. They are the family that lived here for the longest time. So the house passed through ownership of the children for a period of about 80 years. And they're the family that lives here the longest and have the most history on our property here. We're always happy that we get to work with that family still, and they're lovers of history, and we're always looking into the repositories for documents about the families that lived here and kind of our site-specific history here. So we've definitely found some, it's only been within the last year that we've been able to uncover the will of Jacob Dritt and what that has told us, which has been a lot about this family and how they lived. And so we're always, it seems like, coming across new information and stories here as well. And so that's essentially the information about the families that we have. This house definitely was a place where people visited, and there's been some question for us if this house operated as a tavern. It's entirely possible. We would love to be able to have that document with a tavern license. Unfortunately, we don't, that we're able to find. But it's very evident to us that this was a place where people were stopping by, and as it's a grocery store, people are getting their goods here. They're traveling through into York City. And we've been investigating if the attic was a place where people could pay to spend the night and things like that. So we really believe that there's more stories to uncover here. And so it's just a passion of ours, and the connection here with the Susquehanna River, we believe it's a connection between our towns and not a barrier, but it's been a barrier for a long time, and it was a barrier for people traveling back then as well. It was a formidable force, and so that history is definitely here as well, and that's something that we talk a little bit more about on the boat tours, as this place was just such a place of industry, with the canal system that ran right in front of this house down into Maryland. From the crossing of the ferries to our modern structures of the Safe Harbor Dam today, and all the bridges that have crossed the Susquehanna. I think we can't fully wrap our head around the lives and stories that this river comes with, and it continues to amaze us as we move forward with what stories we're looking to tell as an organization. It's also interesting that this place was where someone was enslaved, and yet 5 miles upriver, the property that we have just acquired of the Mifflin House is a place of safety where people were seeking freedom and finding it. So just 5 miles upriver is the Mifflin House property, which is going to become our third site and our second historic site in the next few years that we open to the public. But you mentioned the Wright family that founds Wrightsville. So the great niece of Susanna Wright is a Wright family descendant. She moves to this family farmstead and marries another Revolutionary War soldier, and they were prominent abolitionists, as many members of the Wright family were. And there's definitely this complex duality happening within Pennsylvania during this time that we really want to be able to tell in detail. But we have a lot of stories of enslaved people that wrote down their stories of going through the Mifflin House property and how they would walk by cover of night to the Susquehanna River, right upriver here, and an African-American man named Robert Loney would take them in a small rowboat across to Columbia. And from there to William Whipper, one of the richest people living in Columbia who happened to be African-American, would take those people seeking freedom and employ them at his lumber yards or send them on train cars up to Canada. So there's really these important stories that we're just beginning to tell. And that site is going to be so important in connecting our Underground Railroad stories here. And that property of the Mifflin House is also the location where the Confederate soldiers placed cannons as they fired on the town of Wrightsville here during the Civil War, before the burning of the bridge across the Susquehanna just upriver from here. So there's a lot of history in this area, and we're glad that we now have acquired that property that was set for demolition within the last few years. That now, with the help of the Conservation Fund, Preservation Pennsylvania, that land is preserved, and we have a lot planned. So that's just a little bit about, the duality here and the stories that we're going to be telling in the future a little bit more. But thanks for coming by today. Do you have any questions, if I could help you with anything
Thank you.
else? But yeah, thanks for coming by. And we also have, our properties here. It's open dawn to dusk. We have our walking trail behind here to native lands. You're still welcome to go down to our waterfront pavilion. We do have a map that's reproduced of the Susquehanna River and what it used to look like, looked a little different back then. You're still welcome to go down, take photos of the boat. I think it's still a little too windy that you can't get on. But thanks for coming by today.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It was interesting, we were down in Williamsburg.
Yeah.
And George Washington. Yeah, someone acting as George Washington
Yes.
was telling a story about the slavery and he favored Pennsylvania's form of freedom slave
Yes.
compared to Massachusetts.
Yes.
Which Massachusetts apparently was, as of today, everyone's free.
Yes.
And Pennsylvania was a little, no, I had it the other way. I'm sorry, Massachusetts was, if you were born in slavery, you stayed a slave.
Yes.
But your children were not slaves, something like that. So there was a definite, and for Pennsylvania was a little muddy.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And you know, that act, the Capital Abolition Act was really criticized and has been for, but it didn't free people immediately, you know, and it's like, yes, but it did do something. And
Step in
you
the
have
right
to,
direction.
yeah, and you have to recognize that. So that's something that we try to recognize here and point out is it's creating a legal record for people that normally would never leave behind any, and it's also is freeing people in the future. And yeah, there's just so much here, and we just are almost finished here with our Susquehannock gallery, and moving forward, we're now looking at, you know, how do we tell these stories outside of a tour, and so we are creating more displays for our galleries there in the coming future. And when we open the Mifflin House as our new Discovery Center and Mifflin House Farmstead there, our offices are going to be moving to one of those buildings, and that opens the second floor for telling more stories, and that's what we want to do.
About when do you think that'll happen?
Oh, it's a good question. So we're looking at 2 to 5 years.
Okay.
It is a amount of time, but
Process,
yeah. So we just started with our project teams, which are our teams that one is focused on just identifying the history. What stories are there to tell? How are we going to tell them in the right way? And one team is looked at, okay, how are we going to fund this?
Right.
You know, and what is the design, and what are we going to have? So the first thing that we're looking to do within the next 1 to 2 years is just open the site of the property and create the walking trails to the river to walk in the footsteps of those escaping to freedom, and get the signage out there and get the stories starting to be told before we can open up the buildings and for that. So it's a slow process, but we're glad people have been supportive of it.
Very good.
There's a lot coming, and
You get a lot of support from the county.
we do.
Pretty
Yeah,
good.
we do. You know, and our partnerships have just been phenomenal, and we have our little site here, which is so great, and, you know, we started as one staff person, and, you know, just a few days a week able to rent one room of this house is how we started in 2000. And from there, we've just grown, and we're able to get this property donated to us with the intent for it to be a visitor center. And that just, from then on, you know, we've just grown so much that we're always just in awe of, and we always say it's because of, it's because of the support that we get, and people that are just as passionate as we are and about this. And now we've got our new historic boat, and it's like, we're expanding, and it's amazing. And
is all of this available, or some of it at least, on your website?
yes.
Because I've looked at your website, of course, but not near the detail.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
So we have blog posts. So we do some pretty extensive blog posts going into. So if you go to River History on our website, we have a heritage blog. That's our main form of getting some of this history out there. So we have about the burning of the bridge. We have about eels, power of the river, William Whipper, who was a prominent abolitionist, ice jams. We try to focus a little bit more. Moses.
This is the Susquehannock room, as they call it. It covers everything about the Susquehannock Native Americans. Yeah, they said one thing about the, this is a representation of a drawing from an English perspective. I think it might have even been John Smith who drew this. And they were known to be very tall, some close to like 7 feet, but the average was like 6 feet, 5, maybe 7 foot. That's the native lands where the Susquehannock were.
Let me see.
All the information. Oh, they're showing, this is the video that they were showing earlier. Some of the artifacts that they found right behind here, which was on that information board as well. Now this is a longhouse. I'm not sure if this is the one that they have over there at Hansher, which they have a replica of the Native American longhouse, mostly the Conestogas, which were the Susquehannock first. But then they moved down to Maryland and then came back up toward the Conestoga area and became the Conestoga Indians, or Native Americans.